This is Vermont Edition. I'm Mitch Wertlieb in for Michaela Lafrac. A co-ed recreational softball game becomes the site of a bench-clearing brawl. A marriage proposal made in a restaurant ends with the extremely ill-mannered use of a fork. And what could possibly go wrong when a Flatlander artist moves to a small rural town in Vermont and turns an 8-foot-tall statue of Jesus into a scarecrow to overlook his tomato garden? These are just a few of the scenarios that play out in the new novel Ducks on the Pond by Vermont author Amy Klinger, a book that seamlessly blends elements of farce and the absurd with timely, real-world issues, ranging from religion to immigration and the struggle to find acceptance and community when you have no real roots of your own. Ducks on the Pond is Amy Klinger's second book, following In Light of Recent Events, which was published in 2022. She also works as a communication strategy consultant, and Amy Klinger joins us now in the studios to talk about her new book. Amy, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
And listeners, if you have questions for Amy Klinger about her work or what inspired her to write it, you can give us a call at 800-639-2211, 800-639-2211, or send an email to Vermont Edition at vermontpublic.org. Maybe you're a competitive softball player who loves the game. Maybe you're an artist and you want to know about the world of gallery art in places like Vermont or big cities like Montreal. There's the subject of immigration law, undocumented farm workers in the state, and how different people view religion and religious symbolism. All fodder for today's show. If these topics spark your interest, give us a ring again at 800-639-2211. So, Amy, this book opens up with the foreshadowing of that bench-clearing brawl that I talked about in the open. I don't know if you have any experience, as your lead character does, in sparking a 1970s-style Red Sox-Yankees rumble, but I do know you have played competitive fast-pitch softball. Apparently, your old high school coach helped inspire this book, right?
Yeah. I played softball since I was probably 8 years old. My dad was a big baseball fan. He actually, even when he was a teenager, got to try out for the Brooklyn Dodgers at the time as a pitcher.
Kidding.
Yep.
Wow.
And so baseball and the lure of baseball has always kind of been in the backdrop of my life. But it really wasn't until my freshman year in high school that I really understood the mechanics of the sport, thanks to Glenn Noto, who is my coach at Park Ridge High School in New Jersey. And as I was writing this book, there were so many stories and lore and vocabulary even that I remembered from those days. And I actually reached out to him and I said, hey, once I have an early draft of it, would you take a look at it and correct anything? And he did, and he was a great sport, I guess is the pun here, but he was a super influence back there, and a lot of some of the baseball philosophy that's threaded throughout here comes from his wisdom that I learned a long time ago. Yeah,
there's some great little vignettes there that baseball and softball players will recognize for sure. And the Park Ridge Owls were pretty good, right? Didn't they go undefeated one year?
We were 22-0, our JV softball team, and I'm not even going to let you know how long ago it was. It was a long time ago, but we were undefeated and had a fantastic season.
Fair enough. And a lot of the players, they're the characters in this book. Some of them are older, some of them have lots of injuries. Folks like me who have played at least once in the men's senior league baseball league here can attest to the fact that you got a lot of people out there that can't exactly run fleet of foot anymore, but the love of the game really draws people out.
Yeah.
And that's what it's all about. I do have to ask about the thing that sparks that bench clearing brawl is this little trick that the catcher plays with a rock that he keeps in his cleat. And he uses it to sort of, like, when the pitch is coming in, very surreptitiously knocks it into the batter's ankle, which just throws them off enough to miss the pitch. Is that something that you heard about or that really happened, or did you just make that one up?
Yes, no, that was a trick. Again, coming back to Coach Noto and our assistant coach John Millard, that was a trick that said, I will deny it if you tell anybody that I said this, but in a pinch it could work. I never did it. But,
just to be clear, yeah.
For some reason, it always stuck in the back of my head as just sneaky enough to have an impact.
It's an hilarious moment in the book, and it does spark that brawl. You mentioned the assistant coach named John Millard, you said?
Yeah.
Does that have anything to do with the team that your lead character Ruben is on being called the Mallards? I know it's a little different, but...
No. Actually, the team was called the Otters at some point, and then I realized the title of the book was Ducks on the Pond, so why not make the the
Makes
team,
a
the
lot more
Mallards.
sense there. Yeah. I want to talk about the lead character in this book a little bit, Reuben Downs. He's very complex. He's a painter who also repurposes old discarded items into art sculptures. Lucky in love until he's not. We'll get into that in a second. But at his core, he's an adult who's trying to find permanence in Vermont because he moved around a lot as a kid. No sense of home or roots. And I'm wondering if you were born in Vermont like Reuben, or did you come here as many of us did after a more kind of itinerant childhood?
Yeah. No, I grew up in New Jersey, spent my whole life there, and then moved to Salt Lake City for grad school in my mid-20s. And then I had met my husband out there, or who would be my husband, and we were looking for a place to kind of settle down a little closer to home, but not too close. And Vermont just checked all the boxes. So we moved here in 2000 and it's really become home. And I don't think I could live anywhere else.
I think a lot of people feel the same way as you do. But were there moments when you first moved here, like your character experiences in the book, where you're longing for that sense of community and belonging, but you're finding it difficult because a lot of people will view you as the newcomer, the flatlander, the person from away?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. As I was writing the book, I was thinking about all the sort of the unspoken education that you get when you move to a new place. And the people who really kind of gathered around us when we moved here as people who had never, as flatlanders, for sure. Some of them had grown up here. But you find your people, and living in a small town like Richmond, I don't think it really struck me until I started to do some volunteer work. Our bridge was suddenly going to be closed, and someone asked if I could help out the local businesses to help sustain that. And so that really brought me into the circle of a lot of people from different backgrounds, working towards a common goal in helping support the local business community. And there are definitely some influences of real people that thread through this book that I have met over the years in Richmond and surrounding
Let me
towns.
ask about one of those potential real people here, because I felt this kind of sympathy with Reuben when he goes to a hardware store early on in the book, and the guy who owns or runs the hardware store kind of sizes him up right away. And this is a Vermonter he's been there all the time, and he starts to give him kind of a hard time, like, okay, I'll sell you these materials. Let me know if you need how to use these, to actually. And I'm the guy who would be like, yeah, I don't know how. I don't want to admit that to you. But is that one of those characters that you kind of drew on from real life experience?
For sure. And a lot of these characters are amalgams. I don't think anyone would recognize themselves. But yes, there is sort of that tension between, you're here, you're part of our community, but I also know that you're not entirely part of our community. And what I really love about that character, and some of the other ones that I really tried to focus on, is that idea of what you see on the surface and the people that you meet and the judgments that you make are often upended with the more you have contact with people and you sort of understand where they're coming from. And they have a lot more depth, obviously, than on the surface when we make a knee-jerk reaction about what somebody is actually like.
Yeah, and even at the beginning when these two characters have, this very sort of frosty relationship, later on there's a lovely moment where they come together and they talk philosophy and they just have a real heart-to-heart, get to know each other so much better.
Yeah.
It's great. And the book abounds with relationships like that. It's really about that, I think.
Yeah.
And of course, softball, this is a place setter for your story here. It veers off into so many other different directions, but I love how it starts with softball and this team that loves playing, lives for these summer months. As you and I are talking right now, we're getting towards the tail end of summer. A lot of people who are playing in softball leagues and in baseball leagues are right now like seeing that time sort of dwindle away. And it's so sad because you live for these months in a place like Vermont where it's always so cold. I would love for you to read from a part of the book here on page 84 where you describe the feeling that Reuben gets when he's out there, practicing, getting out there for the first practice of the season.
Yeah. And this is after having not played for a very long time. So this is, I think, he's his first time out at practice when he's joining a group of people that he's never really met before until this moment. So Reuben was surprised at how good it felt to be back on the ball field. It was a unique kind of time machine, stepping fully into muscle memory. He relished the flow and feel of scooping up a fast grounder, rising and launching into a perfectly executed throw to first. It felt like a long dormant spring had been tapped, and all the physics of force and motion, imprinted from hours upon hours of drills, came rushing back into his body. He wanted more line drives, more hard-hit grounders, more over-the-shoulder pop flies.
Love it. I mean, it brings me back to those days. I used to be in a softball league when I lived on Martha's Vineyard. It was slow pitch, so it wasn't quite as competitive as the fast pitch stuff, but we loved it. And it was just, you knew there was this limited amount of time you could really be out there. And I think you encapsulate that beautifully, that feeling of just how good your body feels and your mind just kind of clears, and it's just about the game. Yeah. One of the wonderful things about it. We're speaking with Amy Klinger about her new book, Ducks on the Pond. If you want to give us a ring and join the conversation, call 800-639-2211. Let us know if you've played in a recreational softball or baseball league and if this sounds at all familiar to you. Amy, as I say, the book goes off in so many different directions beyond the softball. There's a lot of relationship talk. There's a lot of love story stuff going on. And I was really surprised. I hope I'm not giving away too much. There are twists that happen in this book. The very first relationship that we're introduced to is Reuben and this woman named Hannah. And I kind of thought, they're good together. They're fun. They're having fun together. They're intimate. This is going to last. But this relationship ends pretty abruptly in a restaurant when unexpectedly Hannah proposes to Reuben. He is not expecting this. When he basically is caught off guard, there's all these people watching, and he says no. What happens next?
Well, Hannah is someone who lives very boldly and is not afraid to make her presence known. And so she does this grandiose proposal, literally down on one knee in front of everybody. They get their phones out, and Reuben is completely blindsided, and he doesn't answer her. And so the tension just builds and builds and builds until she plays it off that it was really just a publicity stunt, a little performance art. And then when everybody starts to look away, they have a private conversation. And he basically says, I don't know that this is what I want. And this has been building for a little bit. And she says, well, we all kind of have to do what we have to do. And she takes a fork and she stabs him in the hand. And that sort of launches him into a whole new adventure in his life.
I mean, I shouldn't laugh because at first it's so comically shocking when she takes that fork and stabs him right in the hand. And, there was my first reaction was, oh my gosh, that's hilarious and dark, but funny. But it's also scary. He's been assaulted. He's been attacked. And he's a painter. So he's worried he might have some nerve damage in his hand there. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, that's the first relationship that Reuben has. Happier relationships will follow, but not without some more unexpected bumps in the road that I will not give away on this one. I was really intrigued by Reuben's next relationship. This is with a woman named Adrienne, and she runs an art gallery in Burlington. She wants Reuben to focus on his painting. He's looking to branch out into some more experimental things, tactile designs using old machine parts and such. There's this interesting moment where Reuben wants to collaborate with one of his softball teammates who likes to record ordinary but interesting sounds. And one of those is the sound of maple syrup dripping into a bucket. And he talks about, could we create this art installation around this? And Adrienne cringes at this thought of such a thing being part of an art show in Burlington. Why does she cringe at that?
Well, I think, to people who have not lived in Vermont for a long time, it's very easy for Vermont to kind of fall into the cliches, the Ben and Jerry's, the maple syrup,
the flannel,
all that. And while it is, there's no cliches are cliches for a reason. There's so much more, and she feels like the art in her gallery she doesn't want to be dragged down by cliches. She wants it to rise up to be a little bit more distinctive, still Vermont, but in ways that people maybe haven't thought before, which I will say is a little analogous to what I was thinking of when I was writing the book. Is that there's all those elements of Vermont, the sap and the maple, but there are some characters and people that you might not otherwise think of as being part of the Vermont community outside of the the cliches.
It was such an interesting discussion between the two characters because I found myself, vacillating back and forth. They each had a really strong point to make. What interested me was in somebody who works in radio and sound is that it sounded very interesting to have that drip, 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 presented in a different way that can make people think differently about something that's as cliche maybe as maple syrup.
Yeah. It you can't get around it. It's spring, and
Right.
and those sap buckets, you see them everywhere. So they are part of the fabric for sure.
Things really start to get complicated in the novel when Reuben acquires an 8-foot-tall Jesus statue. And he turns it, for reasons that become evident, he turns it into a scarecrow and puts this into his tomato garden. He's got a personal reason for doing this. It can't be seen off the main road. It's in his backyard. But a small town being what it is, the statue gets seen by many people and things mushroom after that. There's an immediate reaction, what I imagine is a platform that's supposed to be kind of like Front Porch Forum.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought, that many Vermonters are familiar with. What happens when a neighbor sees this basically Jesus scarecrow?
Yeah, she her dog gets loose, so she ends up in his backyard, and she sees it, and she's shocked by it. I mean, it's 8 feet tall, so it's a little shocking in and of itself. But then to see it dressed as a scarecrow, she has a very negative reaction. She accosts Reuben when he comes home from the grocery store and says, "How could you do this? This is a desecration." And he's just annoyed that she's in his backyard and saying, it's not your business kind of thing. But in a small town, word gets around and things take on a life of their own, which Reuben did not have any control over once it was out.
Yeah, and that really branches out into some other things we're going to get into in a moment. I want to take a quick phone call. Meg is on the line from Huntington. Hi, Meg.
Hello?
Hi, Meg. Can you hear us? Yeah, you're on the air.
I can hear you.
Do you have a question for Amy?
I do, Ms. Klinger. I know Amy. I've read the book. It's excellent. And one thought that occurs to me is that, to me, this book, and you just, I formulated my question before you switched topics, but it's less about baseball, more about relationships. And then it takes a really political turn. And I'm guessing you started writing this book before the last election. So I'm wondering if you can comment on, what happened with the book and what someone who's reading this book now might think about the whole issue with the migrant farm family.
Yeah, yes. Meg is a good friend.
Meg also stole one of my questions. Thank you so much, Meg. No, actually, it's a brilliant question. It's one I was going to ask you later, but please go right ahead.
Yeah, it was tricky. I mean, the book was written at a time where there was a lot more acceptance of the migrant community within Vermont, I will say, recognizing that, farm families needed help. And there's a labor community that was willing to do the work. And it was at a time where that was not as scary. So it's certainly disheartening to be where we are right now. And I would say that for people who have a knee-jerk reaction, my aim with the book in sort of exploring some of these topics was also to educate and to help people understand why a migrant community, a migrant family might come here, and what are the benefits to our community in having them here, and engaging not just on a work level, but also on a neighborly level. And so, I think my hope is that that the book shares a lot of positive relationships that come out of that transcend the politics that we're dealing with right now.
Meg, I really appreciate the phone call and the question. And what we're going to get to, and we'll get deeper into this as we talk about the book, Amy, but what Meg's referring to there is that Jesus scarecrow we talked about is seen by some people as blasphemous, or some people as experimental art, or, other people have different opinions. But there is this small migrant family that lives nearby, just across the road, and they see it as a place to come and literally pray. And they don't view it as blasphemy or anything. They actually want to come there. That's how Reuben gets to know them. But their presence there, of course, leads to issues with ICE. It leads to issues with the safety of this family. I think that's what Megs was referring to there. But you were writing the book, I'm guessing, before the first Trump administration in 2016? Or is it not too far back?
I was writing it after that, but I was setting it before.
I see. Yeah. It's set
so
right
it's in
there
the lead.
before.
It really is set in the lead up to the 2016 election.
Yeah, there's a lot that I want to get into in that realm, because the book really delves into a whole different direction when we get into that part of it. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with Amy Klinger to talk more about Ducks on the Pond in just a moment. You're listening to Vermont Edition. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Mitch Wertlieb in for Michaela Lefrak. And today we're speaking with Vermont author Amy Klinger about her new book, Ducks on the Pond. It's set in the fictional Vermont town of Orrville, and a book that delves into everything from competitive co-ed softball to religious symbolism, from the value and meaning of modern art to issues surrounding immigration and migrant farm workers. If you have a question for Amy Klinger, or maybe you're a fan of her first book in light of recent events, give us a ring at 800-639-2211. That's 1-800-639-2211. You can also send an email to vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. Amy, let's talk a little bit more about, this scarecrow that goes up in the tomato garden that Reuben has. There are no punches pulled regarding his reasons for doing what he did with the statue. There is a character in the book that's a good friend of his from childhood, one of the very few friends that he was able to make because he moved around so much as a kid. And he finds out that his childhood friend, who moved away very suddenly and never let him know why he was moving, he was gone one day, had been a victim of sexual abuse by the Catholic Church. And of course, Vermont is no stranger to that story, given the crimes that were committed at St. Joseph's in Burlington. I'm wondering if that real-life story was on your mind as you decided to include that element in the book.
It wasn't. In fact, it was one of the later parts of the story that developed. The backstory of this book is that it was originally going to be a short story in a collection of short stories, and then for various reasons, I decided to pull out Reuben's story and blow it up into a novel. So the Reuben of the short story was very different than the Reuben that came through in this book.
Huh.
The Reuben of the short story was a confrontational artist. He wanted to stir things up. But I couldn't sustain a novel that was about somebody who was just interested in, kind of kicking up controversy. And so it took a while for me to figure out, well, what is his motivation? Why would he do this? Because it is a provocative move. And, there's a scene where he's actually putting the clothes onto this crucifix, and he has to button up the shirt. And I thought, well, why would somebody do that? What would motivate them? And so that whole backstory of his friend Paul emerged, and it just opened up so much within the story that gave it a lot more depth and meaning to me.
Yeah, it really did. And, you make room to show as well how important faith is for some people. There are no black and white broad strokes painted here when it comes to the meaning and the power of religion. How did you want to present and tackle a topic that can be quite sensitive, even in a state like Vermont that's known to be less religious than many others are?
Yeah, it's a tricky subject. I lived in Salt Lake City for a long time, so obviously the Mormon religion is dominant there, and being an outsider, I think I lived there for 5 or 6 years. I think it gave me an appreciation for recognizing that these are complex topics and people believe very deeply one way or the other, and all across the spectrum. And so I was a little nervous wading into that territory, but I thought, as long as I am allowing myself to step into other people's shoes and seeing it from their perspective, then I hope that I can do it respectfully and give people some things to think about as well.
One of the fun parts of the book too is you see I'm going to call them the front porch forum postings. As people react to this differently, and everyone has a sort of a different take on it. Yeah, like I said, some think it's blasphemous, some think it's kind of funny. There's a woman who represents the Universalist Church who thinks this is fine. This is great. It's all good. So I like how you brought everyone's perspectives in there. And I think that's reflective of Vermont, too. We're a small state, but we've got a lot of different opinions, conservative, liberal, all mixed up together, and the ways different people look at things. I also found it interesting that Maddie, and she is the star pitcher for the Mallards, also Ruben's battery mate when he's catching, she grew up, the character, in a very religious Christian family. We learned that Maddie's actually short for Magdalene. And what upsets her about the Scarecrow Jesus is not that she perceives sacrilege. It's not that she's offended, but that Reuben at first refuses to talk about the Scarecrow's meaning or why he did what he did. And it's one that I found myself sympathizing with. You know, he was saying it's nobody else's business but mine. But how does Maddie disabuse him of that notion?
Yeah, Maddie, I think Maddie earns a lot of respect from Reuben in the fact that she is kind of lost as well. Like he grew up without a home. She grew up with a home and then left it, having grown up in this religious family and community that did, service projects. They'd travel every summer to do service projects. And that idea of, she at one point says that she left the church. She went to college and found herself really questioning whether this was the right, whether she believed, whether it was the right lifestyle for her. And she went off on her own, but found herself caught in a place where she still loves her family and that community she grew up with, but doesn't fit there anymore. And so they find common ground, but she does challenge him on that, saying, you can't just put something up like that and not expect consequences to blow back on you. And so she puts the screws to him a little bit on that front.
And she forces him to think about that, this idea that, and I felt myself sympathizing with him at first. It's like, it's my backyard. Nobody can see this from the road. I didn't put it out where it would be like hanging over the roadway, and I can do whatever I want on my property. But again, she says, the actions that you take, these small things can lead to so much more. And I also think that it was the fact that, he's trying to make friends. He's trying to make relationships and get close to people. And she says, if you're not willing to share, why you did this, what your motivations are, how can I feel that kind of connection with you, right?
Yeah. It's and that's a big part of Reuben's journey, right? Is having not learned those skills all those years growing up, and desperately wanting to connect with people. He learns you've got to get some skin in the game as well. You can't just kind of stand back and put things up in your backyard and expect people to just sit back and not engage with you once it gets out.
Is a softball team, for example, or joining any kind of recreational league, that kind of thing, it can be anything, pickleball, whatever, is that a good way to, do you think, get to know people in a state like Vermont? If you're maybe naturally shy and you don't know how to reach out?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I found myself doing that when we first moved here. In fact, I became very close with a group that plays volleyball in Charlotte, and they are, in some ways, they were somewhat of an influence on this book, and using that idea of that the people that you meet one day a week for an extended period of time are a different kind of family, and they're not people that you would meet at work. They're not people that you would meet in your small friendships. And it's that diversity of personalities and quirks that I found really enriching to imagine. And that was the basis of the collection of short stories. A lot of these characters had their own stories at some point. And it's I think sports and the love of the game really brings people together.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of these characters could have their own novel too. There's such a richness and depth to so many of them. I noted that, when we get into the issues with the migrant farm workers, they work on a goat farm. And I think you were saying in the afterword to the book, you didn't really know a lot about that kind of life. Who did you speak with in Vermont to help you get a sense of things like what life could be like on a goat farm or the myriad challenges that are faced by undocumented workers here?
So there were two paths I took. One was I reached out to the Milk with Dignity program and spoke with someone there, and then realized that there was a woman that I had met years ago, Julia Doucette, who works the healthcare service, and particularly with the migrant community. So I reached out to her and I said, hey, I want to make sure that I'm handling this subject sensitively, respectfully. Would you consider being an advisor and reading and helping me? And luckily, she also speaks Spanish, so I speak Spanish about as well as Ruben does. So she was instrumental, and she really invited me to come down and meet some members of the community, of the migrant community. They had a community supper one night that, again, not being a great Spanish speaker, I was able to go to, and she introduced me to people, and it was really a wonderful, beautiful experience. I also met a family. There's a drawing in here that I can attribute to one of the young girls that I met through this experience. So,
oh, that's a real drawing that a kid made. Oh,
yes.
My gosh.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful part of the book where there's a very young girl who's part of this family. Rosario is her name, and she makes this drawing for Ruben, which ends up actually he signs his name to it, and that becomes a plot point too. I remember reading that part of the book, and I thought to myself, oh, don't do that. This is going to come back to bite you in a big way. I want to get back to what Meg was talking about before when she called, the action of this book is set in the months leading up to the first election of Donald Trump in 2016. There are passing references made to his anti-immigrant rhetoric. ICE officials become entangled up in the narrative as well. But that topic has really only intensified since Trump's second election. We're seeing dramas like the one that you depict in this book being played out in very real-life ways now. I'm curious, again, about this time frame, you writing the story. Did you have any idea that this part of the plot would be so relevant at this moment in time?
No, certainly not. Like I had a lot of hope. I felt like Vermont, and again, we live in a bit of a bubble here. I'm not sure it's that way in a lot of communities, but it felt like we had hit a turning point where there was a recognized interdependence that was opening doors, that communities were looking to support the migrant community that was there. At one point, there's a reference in the book to allowing driver's licenses, and that felt like a big step forward in recognizing, again, that interdependency and having a little bit more acceptance. I'd never imagined that we'd be where we are right now.
It's just, I understand that, but I also found it just incredible that your book, again, a work of fiction. Really, the scenario that plays out with this family, and it takes up the last third of the book, it feels like something that absolutely could be happening in the news right now.
Right.
And kind of terrifying in a lot of different ways. A very resourceful reporter becomes a key player in bringing to light the connections that link Ruben and the Jesus Scarecrow with this migrant farm worker family. The drama gets a much bigger platform beyond local social media. And the reporter, he's not trying to bust Ruben or the workers. He's writing about their plight with kind of a sympathetic tone. Given everything going on right now, though, do you share the reporter character's viewpoint that having people who might be hostile to undocumented workers learn about their real human relatable problems can maybe be persuaded not to see them as threats, but as people who just want to work and are trying to do the best for their families under tough circumstances?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was, in some ways, the reporter Patton talks about how he views his job as really helping bring greater understanding to people who might have differences of opinions. I think as Americans, we often like to think of things as either right or wrong, black or white, and there's a lot of gray area. And once you know people's stories, and it happens time after time, once you get to meet people and talk with them and understand where they're coming from, it's much harder to demonize them. And so that's, Patton looks at that as his responsibility to help bridge some understanding. And in some ways, I wrote that part as part of myself, that realizing that this book, I was hoping to bring a little bit greater understanding and empathy to people who might just see the issue as black and white.
So generally speaking, you're somewhat optimistic. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I know it's tough. It's a tough question.
I think it it relies on people caring.
Yeah.
And so the more people who care, the more optimism I have. These are scary times that we're living in, and I think the more we focus on these communities, on our small local communities, in building the support and in embracing and rallying behind people who are being caught up in the situation, I think that's where it starts. That's where my hope lies.
Before I let you go, Amy Klinger, I have to ask, there's one point in the novel, Ruben's working through some anger issues. He's blasting some music by, I believe it's the Butthole Surfers. I'm not 100% sure, while working on his barn. It turns out you have some affinity with the world of punk rock. Tell us about your band, Violent Crimes.
Violent Crimes was not something I ever anticipated being a part of. During the pandemic, my husband and I just started playing some music together, mostly folk and other stuff. And he had been in a metal band. And when things started opening up, he said, "I think I'm going to leave the metal band, and I want to play some punk music." Got together with a drummer. He said, "Hey, would you want to come down and sing for us?" And I said, "No, I do not want to come down and sing for you." And he said, No, we'll just do covers. It'll just be for fun, once a week, no big deal." So we did that. And it was fine. It was casual. And then bass player came in, and then they started writing some original music. And then they said, "Hey, you're a writer. You can write lyrics, right?" And I said, I don't know. I'll try." And at every step of the way, it just got harder and harder to back out. And yes, we are now a punk band. We play out around Burlington and other areas in New Hampshire and New York, and it's been a thing. Let's
go out with a few seconds of your tune, "Can I Be Honest," from the EP Fighting Words.
Can I be honest? I'm not happy. Thinking about the way we've grown apart. There are nights we hardly see each other.
Okay, it's not my genre, but I got to tell you, Amy, if the writer thing doesn't work out, you got a future fronting this punk band here. I want to thank you so much for the time, and you're going to be reading from the book, I believe, September 3rd. There's an event. It's kind of a book club event at Bridgeside's One Town, One Book wrap-up event, September 3rd. September 18th, you'll be signing books at Phoenix Books in Burlington, and the book will be available, published in October. It's available now at local independent bookstores or through your website. We'll have links to that at vermontpublic.org. Amy Klinger, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Loved being here.
And we're going to take a quick break, and we will be back talking about the Middlebury New Filmmakers Festival with Jay Craven and the executive director as well. And that's coming up next on Vermont Edition. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Mitch Wertlieb in for Michaela Lefrak. For more than a decade now, the Middlebury New Filmmakers Festival has provided a haven for cinephiles in Vermont to gather together and get a first look at a wide range of new movies. Documentaries, dramas, comedies, experimental films, there is pretty much something for everyone who loves movies to watch and talk about, and this year has seen an expansion of pre-festival activity as well. The Middlebury New Filmmakers Festival starts this Wednesday and runs through Sunday. Joining us to talk more about this year's offerings is the festival's artistic director and a well-known filmmaker himself, Jay Craven. Jay, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Mitch.
And joining us remotely is Caitlin Boyle, the festival's new executive director. Caitlin, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Caitlin, I want to start with you. How many films about will be screening over the festival's 5-day run, and how wide-ranging are these offerings?
We have 107 films in this year's program, and 19 of them are student films, both documentary and narrative, shorts and features. And then the rest of the program are mostly films made by first and second time directors and producers. We also have a handful of films that represent the work of our festival honorees. So there's some repertory content in there that showcases their body of work. But they range in genre, in length, in tone. We have, as you say, documentaries, narratives, some lighthearted that offer a little levity in these complex times, and some that dig into that complexity.
Right. Yeah, we can certainly use a little of both, I suppose. Jay Craven, it's always a thrill when Vermont filmmakers get into the action. I understand there's a strong showing of Vermont-based films, helped along with the funding from the Made Here series. What are some of the locally made films from Vermont that you're excited about?
Well, two that were made with support from Vermont Public include Braiding a New Life, about a Ghanan refugee seeking asylum in Brattleboro, and La Liga, which is about this fabulous soccer league that was formed by migrant farm workers right here in the Champlain Valley. But in addition to that, there's a fabulous student film actually called Free Chair, which is sort of funny, and a young filmmaker from the Northeast Kingdom, Max Zevon Powell, who's been to the festival before. But you know how you drive down the dirt road and there's a free chair sitting outside somebody's place.
Sure.
It's a matter of who grabs it first. Well, a couple sees it, goes back to get their truck to haul it, and by the time they get back, somebody else wants it. So that's the premise, and that's where it starts.
That's great.
But also Heidi Levitt, who's actually a casting director who's worked a lot in Hollywood, has a film called Walk With Me about her husband who is experiencing early onset Alzheimer's, and sort of a very intimate story of that. Gone Guys and Far Out, two films that have been traveling around Vermont a lot. Gone Guys, produced partly by the Vermont Community Foundation, exploring the question of young men and their progress and their identity and their struggles to, fully realize their potential. Far Out, about commune life, which focuses a lot on the Brattleboro, or the Guilford, I think, based commune Total Loss Farm and its evolution over the years. A film. We also have a Vermont honoree, Alan Nichols, who's been a fixture in the Vermont scene for decades, who was assistant director to Robert Altman for 20 plus years. Also wrote music with Altman, appeared on screen in Nashville. A very interesting character.
And Slapshot too, right?
Slapshot was on screen with Paul Newman. Really great film by George Roy Hill. Was actually in the original cast of Hair.
No
Also,
kidding.
Yeah. And was one of the early directors of Saturday Night Live. Interesting character. Will be on stage to talk about his work over the years. But a very strong, I think, Vermont collection, and the Vermont public support, which happened a couple of years ago, $100,000 of grant money, around 10 or 15 grants, really shows the impact that kind of support has. Relatively small investments, but really interesting films.
I'll tell you very briefly that one of my great thrills subbing in on this show is when Alan Nichols actually called in. We were doing a show about hockey, and because Slapshot's one of my favorite films of all time, and I can't believe I'm speaking with
his
one
grandfather
of the
was a star in Canada.
Yeah, I had heard that
Star.
actually. Incredible.
Yeah.
It's great stuff. Caitlin Boyle, I understand that there is a new mentorship program that's emerging this year for filmmakers. What can you tell us about that?
I'm so excited about this program. Before I came to be the executive director of MNFF, I have worked for a long time in documentary distribution and social impact work. And mentorship emerges as one of the gaps that early filmmakers find as they're trying to break out into the field. Often filmmakers feel, a little lost or a little isolated and wish that they had somebody who could lead them through the first few years of their emergence as artists and as creatives, and also as business people, navigating contracts and licenses and the public lives of their films. And so we have decided this year to create a brand new creative distribution mentorship program. We're starting with 4 mentees, each of whom is paired with a mentor who's been around the block a few times and can offer insights and support and guidance and introductions and get filmmakers on their way to building the kinds of relationships that can sustain them for the long haul in their careers. So we will have 2 fiction filmmakers and 2 documentary filmmakers joining us at the festival starting this week. And they will meet their mentors and they will get to show some of their work in a kind of workshop setting with their mentors and experience the festival live. And then that will be the launch pad for the next several months of intensive workshopping, partnering, collaborating, and conversation that will be guided by us as a staff at MNFF.
That's really exciting. Jay Craven, I believe that you said that this year's festival is as much about ideas as it is about film. What do you mean by that?
Well, films are inherently about ideas, and a film viewer who comes and sees, a dozen films over the course of 5 days goes away with a lot to think about, a lot to talk about. But this year we're also actually stopping and focusing specifically on a couple of areas that inform narrative generally and are just ripe with ideas. One of them is journalism. Looking at also how journalism contributes as a force to create a public narrative and myth. Huge topic, I think, that we can't even begin to deal with, although will have a couple of sessions focused on it. And participating there will be Geeta Anand, who is the new editor at Vermont Digger, also Alyssa Wilkinson, who's a film critic for the New York Times, and also senior White House correspondent David Sanger, who'll be coming really directly from the Anchorage summit pretty much to be with us. And actually this morning's New York Times has a story where David Sanger broke the story of European heads of state coming to Washington to accompany and support Zelensky. Also, we'll be looking into comedy, again, as a force for narrative and to create opportunities also for social impact. So, I think that there are so many ideas that can be transmitted through film. It's what's unique about it. It can take you anywhere and really dig into various kinds of stylistic offerings. We're going to be having two sessions that focus on experimental film. Scott McDonald, who's written 20 books on the subject of experimental films, will be showing 9 films. And there again, ideas straight off the screen to think about, even in terms of how we perceive reality, how we perceive cinema. So really exciting, and I think that people in coming really can look forward to opportunities for talk. I mean, the festival itself is so intimate in its close quarters in downtown Middlebury with 6 venues that are all walking distance. You encounter new people, you meet other folks, you start conversations, and that's what we're hoping to help happen.
Yeah, so much can come from just seeing a film and then the ideas that spring from that. Speaking of the journalism angle, Caitlin Boyle, I know that there was something that happened before the festival began where Peter Sarsgaard was on hand to talk about his 2003 film Shattered Glass, a movie I highly recommend. I'm into journalism, and what was the idea behind bringing him in to talk about a movie that's now really almost a quarter century old?
Yeah, we were very glad that he and his wife Maggie Gyllenhaal could join us last Friday. We had a wonderful turnout, and Shattered Glass is actually remarkably fitting as a sort of amuse-bouche for the rest of the festival because it has some of these themes that Jay mentions. Of course, Shattered Glass is about the case of Stephen Glass, who worked for the New Republic as a very young man, and was found out pretty early into his career there that he was fabricating his stories, in part or in full in some cases. And in Shattered Glass, we see Peter Sarsgaard as his editor, Chuck Lane, based on the real life Chuck Lane, who begins to doubt Stephen and then has to navigate this process of uncovering his lies and figuring out how to move forward from them. And I think that tension between a good story. Stephen Glass was an amazing storyteller, but as Peter Sarsgaard said in the post-film conversation, he probably should have been writing fiction. He missed his calling, and he wasn't writing journalism. He was making things up. And so I think our whole festival actually explores this tension between a good story and entertainment and that which engages us and lights us up and makes us feel magnetized and present, and stories that are true. And this question of how we can have both at the same time, and both fiction and nonfiction, of course, can tell us something true. And navigating the distance between those poles is kind of the work of all of us as citizens.
I wish we had more time to talk about all of this. I want to quickly mention that there are connections, too, with Vermonters, including Bianca Stone, who will talk about the poetry of film. A writer that I've interviewed and who at this wonderful Melanie Finn has a new a film coming out based, I hope, on one of her books. And we can get more into that next time. But right now we have to end it here. I want to thank Jay Craven, Artistic Director of the Middlebury New Filmmakers Festival. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
And Caitlin Boyle, the festival's Executive Director, thank you so much. It runs starting Wednesday through Sunday. You can visit our website, vermontpublic.org, to find out about tickets and more. That's it for today. You can always pitch us an idea by emailing vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. Today's show was directed by Mary Angus. John Ahrens is our managing producer. Andrea Lorien and Daniela Fierro are our producers. Today's call screener was Kelly Delorier, and our theme music is by Myra Flynn. I'm Mitch Wertlieb, in for Michaela Lefrak. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch up again soon.
These days, there's so much news, it can be hard to keep up with what it all means for you, your family, and your community. The Consider This podcast from NPR features our award-winning journalism. 6 days a week, we bring you a deep dive on a news story and provide the context and analysis that helps you make sense of the news. We get behind the headlines. We get to the truth. Listen to the Consider This podcast from NPR.